Truth tables are a good way to organize the truth values for your conditional statements. And this is going to come very handy when you start working on like the law of syllogism or the law of detachment. Because remember, when we're dealing with logic, it could get confusing, and truth tables could organize a lot of the information. So, how do we use the truth table? Well, we just look at the different cases. So, P is our hypothesis, Q is the conclusion, and then my if then statement would have this form: if P then Q, and then we're going to write down our truth value. So, I just look at what are the different ways or conditions, for the hypothesis and the conclusion. What are the different values we can have? Well, I can have a true hypothesis and a true conclusion. I can have a true hypothesis and a false conclusion. And those are the only options if I were to start with true for the hypothesis, right? There's only true or false left. But I could also start with a false hypothesis and I can end up with a false conclusion, and then I can have a false hypothesis and a true conclusion. And these are all the different combinations of true and false we could possibly have. All right, so there's four different cases. And in my if then statement, well, it'd be true implies false, or true implies true. All right, my if P then Q, so they're both true in this case. I can have a conditional where it's true and false here. This is my other conditional where the hypothesis is false, conclusion is false, and then my other conditional where hypothesis is false and the conclusion is true. And in the first case, the truth value, if I have a situation where the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is true, well, that would be a truth value of true. And then if I have a true hypothesis and it implies a false conclusion, then in this case it would be false. And then if I have a false hypothesis and it implies a false conclusion, that was a truth value. And then if I have a false hypothesis and a true conclusion, that also had a truth value of true. So there basically is one instance when you have a false conditional, and that's if the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false, right? Because we're going to have a contradiction in this case. Here, there's no contradictions. This is why our truth value is true in these two cases here, even though my hypothesis is false. So you have to recall that a false hypothesis, right, means we never have to even consider this conditional, because if my hypothesis is false, then the outcome, whether it's true or false, does not matter, because in order to take this conditional into consideration, we have to have the hypothesis be true. So in this case here, it doesn't really matter, because since I don't have to pay attention to the hypothesis because they're false, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is. The truth value is true because I'll never have a contradiction in these two cases.